I suspected my wife was planning a divorce, so I transferred my assets 2 weeks before she filed. When her plan failed, she just gave up. Hey folks, I've been lurking through posts here for a while, believing I'd never have my own story to tell. However, life has a way of shocking you, and I've been carrying this for months. I need to get it off my chest. To be clear, I was never the type to jump to conclusions or assume the worst. My wife, let's call her M, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 4. Things were solid, more or less. I thought we'd experience the typical ups and downs, but nothing that made me think, oh, we actually have a problem here. For most of our relationship, we were that couple, totally committed partners. We laughed at stupid inside jokes, argued for hours about which movie to watch, and had a rhythm that just worked. She'd organize elaborate date nights, and I'd bring home her favorite takeout after a long day. It felt easy, like we had figured out the whole love thing. So what happened next hit me like a ton of bricks. The change. About 6 months ago, things started to shift. At first, it was the smaller details, things you'd probably miss if you weren't paying attention. Em started carrying her phone everywhere, even when she was just going to the kitchen or folding laundry. Before, her phone would sit on the counter for hours and she didn't care who picked it up. One day I made this joke, "Are you running some secret spy program?" She laughed and said, "No, work has just been sending me a lot of emails." Okay, fine. But a few days later, she added a passcode. That caught me off guard because she'd never used one before. When I casually asked why, she responded with something vague about security and hackers. I didn't press because I didn't want to seem paranoid, but it just didn't sit right with me. And it didn't stop there. She started taking calls outside the room, which she'd never done before. She wasn't discreet about it either. Her phone would ring and she'd say, "Oh, let me just grab this real quick," before disappearing into the bedroom or out on the porch. If I asked who it was, she'd simply say it was just a friend from work. Then I noticed a new habit, keeping her phone face down on the table. I had no idea this was a thing until I reached over to hand her something and she quickly moved the phone out of the way. It was one of those blink and you miss it moments, but it stayed with me. Growing distance. However, it wasn't all about the phone. She started feeling distant. Conversations that used to flow easily now felt like pulling teeth. If I brought up future plans, like where should we go to celebrate our anniversary, or do you think we should start saving for a new car, she'd just nod and say, "Yeah, we'll see," before changing the subject. It all came together for me on a random Wednesday. She told me she was going out with a friend for coffee after work. It didn't seem strange, she did this occasionally. By chance, I was shopping in the same area, so I thought, why not surprise her? It'll be cute. However, when I arrived, she wasn't with her friend. She was standing outside the cafe, phone pressed against her ear. I stayed in my car because something about the way she was talking seemed serious. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but I heard phrases like, "It's almost ready," and "starting fresh soon." It gave me a knot in my stomach. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it didn't sound like work or a conflict between friends. It sounded like something bigger, something she'd been planning. When she got home, I asked her how the coffee date went, trying to keep my tone casual. She told me a complete story about her friend complaining about her boyfriend. It was such an offhand comment that I just stood there for a second. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged. "I just think we should have everything in one place, like all our account information, passwords, documents, that kind of thing. Just in case of emergency." I wasn't sure what to say. This was something we'd never discussed before, and the timing seemed strange considering everything else I'd noticed. "What kind of emergencies?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. She shrugged casually again. "It's just smart, right? What if something happens to one of us, or what if we need to make a big financial decision quickly?" Her argument made sense on the surface, but something about the way she delivered it made me uneasy. It seemed too rehearsed, too polished, as if she'd been waiting for the right moment to bring it up. I nodded and mumbled something like, "Yeah, I guess that's a good idea," but inside, alarms were going off. Why now? Why were we suddenly concerned about organizing our finances when we'd always kept them separate? That night, my mind was racing. I kept replaying her words, trying to figure out what they meant. Was this just typical adult behavior and I was reading too much into it? But then I remembered the phone calls, the conversation I'd overheard at the cafe, and how distant she'd been recently. It all started adding up, and I didn't like the picture that was being painted. Taking action. Up until then, I hadn't done anything about it. A few days later, she mentioned it again. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich and she was looking through her phone when she commented, "Have you thought more about organizing things from the bank? Like, do you know where all the account details are?" I put down the knife and turned to face her. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light but firm. "You've been mentioning finances a lot lately. Is there something we need to talk about? She finally looked up from her phone, surprised that I'd pressed the issue. No, nothing's wrong, she said quickly. It just makes sense. I just think it's important, that's all. You know, for emergencies. Emergencies like what? I asked. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. I don't know, life stuff. It's not a big deal, I promise. I just think it's something we should take care of. The response felt evasive, too vague. I nodded and let it go, but the way she avoided giving a direct answer made me even more suspicious. It didn't feel like a casual suggestion anymore. It felt like she was hiding something, but I had no idea what. So the next day, while she was at work, I decided to take a look. I opened our joint account online and discovered something unexpected. Over the last month, several small changes had occurred. Nothing too significant, but small amounts that didn't seem to have a clear purpose. They weren't for groceries or bills. It looked like she'd been withdrawing money without explaining why. I considered talking to her about it, but something told me to wait. If I was wrong, I'd look ridiculous, and if I was right, I had to be careful. This was eating at me, so I reached out to someone I trusted, an old friend from college who happens to be a lawyer. I told him what I'd discovered while trying not to sound like a conspiracy theorist. Look, he said after I explained everything, I'm not saying something's definitely going to happen, but you're not crazy for wanting to be prepared. If you're worried about protecting your assets, now is the time to do it more safely than to regret it later. He explained what I could do, simple procedures to ensure my finances were protected if something happened. I'll admit, taking such a drastic action felt out of character, like I was preparing for something terrible even without being sure what was wrong. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If she really was up to something, and I was beginning to suspect she was, I needed to protect myself. It wasn't an easy decision. However, this wasn't just about money or material possessions. It was about the life we'd built together. I kept replaying images in my head of our wedding day, late-night conversations about our dreams, and the weird little jokes we shared. How did we get here? Is this what our marriage had become? The prospect of taking these steps felt like admitting defeat, like I was officially giving up on the trust we'd previously shared. That night, while she was out, I sat at my desk, my hand trembling as I opened my laptop and started looking through everything. Bank accounts, investment accounts, the deed. Each piece of paperwork felt like a betrayal, but a persistent voice in my head reminded me that this was about survival, not sabotage. I didn't want to hurt her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't act now, I'd regret it later. I compiled a list of everything I could transfer and how to do it without raising suspicions. As I typed, I felt a crushing weight settle on my chest. I had trusted her completely for years, and here I was, playing defense against the person I thought would always have my back. I called my mom and explained why I needed her help, though not in detail. I need you to hold some things for me for a while. Nothing bad, just something I need to do to protect myself. She was silent for a minute, probably trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. Okay, her voice was full of concern. Yes, I lied. It's just a precaution. Nothing to worry about. She didn't insist, but I could hear the pause in her voice when she replied, Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need. I hung up the phone with a strange mixture of relief and guilt. I hated involving her in this mess, but knowing I had her support provided a bit of stability amid the chaos. By the time Em came home, I'd already started the process of transferring most of my assets, our investments and even the house, into my mother's name. I kept enough in our joint account to maintain appearances, but the rest was secured. She didn't notice anything. She just gave me a kiss on the cheek and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. She seemed fine, but inside I was a mess. Part of me felt terrible, like I'd betrayed her trust, but another part of me felt enormous relief, like I'd finally regained control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of my hands. For the next few days I tried to maintain a normal routine. I didn't want her to know that anything had changed. She seemed content, even exceptionally cheerful at times. However, instead of putting me at ease, it increased my suspicion that she was planning something. She did an excellent job of hiding whatever stood out. However, she never mentioned the finances again, not even after I'd questioned her the last time. It was as if the subject had evaporated. At first, I thought I'd overreacted and she'd dismissed the matter since it wasn't relevant. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was avoiding it, almost as if she was afraid to bring up the subject again after I'd pressed her. I noticed her staring at me a few times, as if assessing my mood or contemplating whether to say something. Every time I noticed, she'd quickly return her attention to whatever she was doing, phone, TV, a book. It was subtle, but it was there. She seemed to be waiting for me to mention it, as if she didn't want to push the issue again. The silence only made me more anxious. It wasn't like she'd dropped something she considered essential, and the way she suddenly avoided it seemed deliberate. If she was testing the waters, she wasn't going to dive in. If she was waiting for something, I wasn't going to give her the green light. Whatever her next move was, I knew I had to stay one step ahead. Something was coming, but I didn't know when or how. All I could do was prepare. That night, I made sure everything was solid. I took another look at the documents, double-checking every aspect of my asset transfer. My mother had the house, savings, investments. Everything was now legally in her name, sealed in an ironclad trust. I even called her to confirm she had all the necessary documents. The divorce announcement. 2 weeks passed and everything seemed normal, like nothing had happened. Honestly, she was acting more affectionate, even starting to talk about unrelated things like jobs or what we should eat that night. It threw me off because she'd been distant for months, avoiding anything beyond superficial conversations. Part of me started to question whether I'd overreacted. Maybe the strange behavior was just stress or something I didn't understand. But then, on a random Friday night, she sat me down on the couch, turned off the TV, and said we needed to talk. My stomach twisted. I suddenly knew what she was going to say before she said it. "I think we should get a divorce," she said, her voice so calm it seemed rehearsed. It wasn't angry or emotional, it was just cold, like she was telling me we were out of milk. I stared at her, not knowing how to respond. As she explained her reasoning, she mentioned needing space, wanting to find herself, and feeling like she'd lost her identity in the pattern of marriage. All typical breakup phrases that didn't really explain anything. But then she said something that conveyed a different message. "You know, I've made a lot of sacrifices for you over the years and I don't think you really appreciate them. I deserve better." That last part hurt the most. It wasn't just that she wanted to leave. She was framing the situation as if I owed her something, as if everything was my fault and she was simply claiming what was rightfully hers. As I sat there trying to process what she was saying, a new question emerged. Then she said something that made everything start to make sense. "A friend of mine has been helping me see things more clearly," she continued, not looking at me. A friend. I remained still, letting her talk, but my mind was racing. Who was this friend? Why were they so involved in my marriage? The way she said it, it wasn't casual. It sounded like someone had been coaching her, convincing her that leaving me wasn't simply a choice, but a strategy she needed to implement. And the more she talked about how she deserved more because of her sacrifices, the more I began to doubt what kind of sacrifices those were. She'd been happy with me, or so I thought. I'd worked hard to offer her the life she wanted. It wasn't just about money. When she asked to move closer to work, I agreed, even though it meant a longer commute for me. When she wanted to take that expensive yoga class at the retreat last year, I made sure we had it in the budget, even giving up a vacation I was looking forward to so she could go. I supported her when she changed careers twice, telling her it was okay to take the risk because I wanted her to be happy. I believed being a decent husband meant putting her first whenever possible, and it wasn't like I was an insensitive, distant partner. I showed up. I remembered birthdays and random things she'd mentioned loving. When she mentioned feeling stuck in a rut, I suggested date nights. I listened to her complain about her work, friends, and family. I didn't always get it right, but I tried. That's why her "you don't deserve more" stung so badly. I didn't even consider it. She wasn't upset because of anything I did or didn't do. She was upset because something had changed in her, and maybe it was this friend she kept mentioning or something like that. But the woman sitting in front of me wasn't the woman I married, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the history of our marriage to fit her new narrative. I didn't press her at the moment. Instead, I nodded and said something innocuous like, "If that's how you feel, I guess we should figure out the next step." She seemed surprised that I wasn't there to argue or beg her to stay, but I didn't care. My attention had already shifted. I needed to know who or what was causing her sudden planned change in behavior. She hadn't simply woken up one day and decided she wanted to leave. This was something bigger, and I wasn't going to let it surprise me any more than it already had. The divorce papers. Soon after that conversation, she moved into her own apartment, and I received the divorce papers on Monday. Believe it or not, they didn't just want to end the relationship. They planned to take everything. Half the house, my savings, my assets, and the car she wanted, plus some vague spousal support clauses that made little sense considering she had a high salary herself. It seemed like she was expecting me to give her everything I had. At first, I assumed she just wanted revenge, but the way she articulated her demands, so specific and aggressive, assured me she had someone guiding her through this. The investigation. So I started investigating. I couldn't just ask her who she'd been talking to, so I had to be smart. I started with her social media. She hadn't blocked me, and even though she didn't post frequently, I searched through her tagged photos and comments looking for someone new showing a pattern. That's when I found Jake. He liked and commented repeatedly on her posts. Not obscene but enough to make me pause. I clicked on his profile. At first glance it seemed public. He didn't appear to be much more than a marketing professional in his 30s. But as I scrolled down I spotted something unusual. He posted a photo at the same cafe where I'd seen her weeks before, on the same day I'd overheard her talking about starting fresh. My stomach twisted as I continued scrolling. More subtle signs appeared, a comment on one of her photos that read, "You've got this too," plus a selfie he'd taken from what appeared to be her new residence. None of this was substantial proof, but it was enough to increase my suspicion. I wasn't sure what to do with this information, but I knew I couldn't just sit and wait for solutions to come to me. Her statement about a friend who'd helped her see things clearly stayed with me, and I wanted to know who it was. So I decided to contact some of our mutual acquaintances. Lisa, she and my wife had been friends for years, so she knew what was going on. I kept the conversation light at first, asking if she'd talked to my wife recently or if anything seemed strange. Lisa reacted quickly, saying she had no idea about any friend or any suggestions. I probed a bit more but she cut the conversation short, getting defensive. She claimed she couldn't comment. The whole situation felt rushed and evasive, like she was trying to avoid getting involved. Unwilling to give up, I called another friend, Emily. I followed the same pattern, saying I was just trying to make sense of things. She was initially apprehensive, responding vaguely to my questions. When I pressed her more, she ended the call quickly, leaving me even more skeptical than before. I sat there frustrated, trying to figure out my next step. To my surprise, Emily called back and said she needed to make sure what she told me wouldn't get back to anyone. I assured her it wouldn't, and after a long pause she revealed what she knew. Apparently, my wife was spending a lot of time with someone named Jake whom she'd met at work. Emily said she didn't know much more beyond the fact that Jake was very active in giving advice about the divorce my wife was getting. Hearing that name was like a puzzle piece clicking into place. It was clear that this was more than just her needing space or finding herself. Someone else was in the picture, driving her decisions, and I was eager to find out why. The confrontation. I decided to confront it on my own. That Saturday, I went to her apartment building and parked a block away, trying to confirm what I already suspected. A few hours later, she and Jake came out of the building. They weren't holding hands or anything, but the way they walked together, close, leaning in to talk, said plenty. They got into his car and drove away, leaving me sitting there, staring at the spot where they'd been. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. At that moment, it became clear that she hadn't simply stopped loving me, she was preparing to leave with someone else. And now everything made sense. The unexpected distancing, the monetary issues, the aggressive demands, the divorce papers. She wasn't simply abandoning me, she was leaving me with nothing, and she was accompanied by someone the entire time. I drove home that night with my head spinning. Everything I'd learned about the betrayal burned, but what hurt most was how premeditated it all was. She was using the divorce as a stepping stone to whatever life she was building with Jake. But she had no idea what I had planned for her. The mediation. The first mediation session felt tense from the moment we walked in. Her lawyer arrived with a folder so thick it looked like they were bringing a lawsuit against a Fortune 500 company. He started listing her demands as if they were completely reasonable. Half the house, the savings, my assets, the car, and even some mumbo-jumbo about spousal support. I remained silent, seemingly listening, but I was waiting for my lawyer to do his part. When it was finally our turn, he slid a stack of papers across the table and said, "Before we proceed, I think it's important that everyone reviews these." Her lawyer picked up the documents and flipped through them quickly. His confident posture changed rapidly as he turned through the pages. His forehead furrowed more with each one. "What is this?" he asked, staring at my lawyer. "These documents show the transfer of all major assets into a trust in my client's mother's name," my lawyer said calmly. "The transfers were completed several weeks before the divorce filing, and the trust is completely legal and irrevocable." The room fell completely silent as her lawyer looked at her, confused and frustrated. "You didn't mention this," he stated flatly. She grabbed the papers from his hands and flipped through them, her face flushing. "This can't be real," she said, staring at the notarized signatures. Then she turned to me. Her facial expression changed from disbelief to fury. "You planned this?" she muttered angrily, staring at me as if I'd committed a heinous crime. "You knew I was going to file, and you set this up to hurt me?" I didn't respond. I just sat there and let her piece it together herself. Her lawyer visibly stirred and asked my counsel to elaborate. So he did, slowly, deliberately, and with every piece of evidence needed to make the transfers indisputable. The dates lined up perfectly, indicating I'd transferred everything well before she filed. The signatures were properly notarized and the trust was solid. There was nothing they could do to contest it. She was furious. "You're unbelievable," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "I can't believe you'd do something like this to me." I still hadn't said anything about what was there to say. This wasn't about me doing something to her, it was about defending myself because she'd made it clear she wasn't going to the conference without a fight. The session ended with her lawyer saying something about needing to rethink their strategy, but everyone in the room knew they had nothing left to work with. When we left the building, she pulled me aside in the hallway, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "This isn't over," she said in a low voice. "You're going to regret this." I just looked at her and said, "I already regret trusting you. That's the only regret I have." The aftermath. Things accelerated faster than I'd anticipated after the mediation session. She went into complete breakdown mode. It started almost instantly with endless calls. At first she seemed calm, even remorseful, leaving voicemails that began with, "I think we just need to talk," or, "I know this got out of hand but we can fix it." When I didn't respond, the tone changed throughout the day. Her messages alternated between sobbing and screaming. In one voicemail, she'd lament about making a mistake and not wanting to lose what we'd built together, then she'd launch into an angry tirade, accusing me of being petty and cruel, blaming me for everything that was wrong in her life. I ignored it all. My lawyer told me not to get involved, and honestly I was done playing her games. But she didn't stop. When the calls and texts didn't work, she started reaching out to mutual friends, telling them that the divorce was a hoax, that it was all part of a big prank. I mean, who would believe that? The flaws in her story quickly became apparent. Friends started asking questions like, "If it was a prank, why did you file formal legal documents?" Or, "Why hire a lawyer and make such specific demands if it wasn't serious?" When others didn't immediately accept the prank explanation, she changed her justification. She said it wasn't a prank, but a test of our relationship strength. She started presenting herself as the victim, claiming my reaction had hurt and betrayed her, that I'd gone too far and broken our trust in the marriage. At first, some people seemed to believe her stories. I'd get weird emails or comments from acquaintances like, "Wow, I had no idea things were so difficult for you too." Even her brother attacked her, saying, "You guys should have worked this out by talking instead of being so drastic." It was irritating, but I knew the truth would come out eventually. And it did, thanks to a friend, let's call him Matt. The truth comes out. Matt and I weren't particularly close, but we'd always been on good terms. A few weeks after the mediation, he unexpectedly messaged me saying he had something I needed to see. When we met, he brought up his phone and showed me a series of text messages between her and Jake. I was confused at first. "How did you get these?" I asked, examining the messages. Matt revealed that he and Jake shared a mutual friend who'd overheard their conversations. Apparently, the mutual acquaintance had gotten concerned about the way things were going, especially when Jake started bragging about how he was helping her secure her future. It didn't take long for the mutual friend to figure out what securing her future really meant, trying to bleed me dry. Feeling it was wrong to stay silent, the friend took screenshots of the messages and sent them to Matt, believing he had a better relationship with me and could warn me. "This guy's been playing both sides," Matt said, shaking his head. "He's been building her up to take you for everything while making her believe he'd be there for her afterward." Matt gave me the texts and said, "I thought you should know. You don't deserve this, man." The messages were awful. She wasn't just running to Jake about the divorce, she was actively planning her next steps with him, and he was guiding her through them. One message she sent said, "Once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need." Jake responded, "Don't back down. Make him feel guilty if you have to. Make him feel like he owes you. Then we'll start fresh once you get the money." I sat there staring at Matt's phone, trying to understand what I was reading. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an emotional response to a failed marriage. This was cold, deliberate manipulation. I thanked Matt and left, but my thoughts were racing. Everything made sense now: her abrupt isolation, her fixation with our finances, and her harsh demands during the entire divorce process. It was all part of a plan, one she'd been developing with Jake behind the scenes. The final resolution. The texts quickly spread among our mutual friends. Matt shared them with a few people and they rapidly spread the news. Her story suddenly stopped being credible. People who'd previously been indifferent or even supportive of her started to distance themselves. The change was almost immediate. People who defended her or remained neutral suddenly recognized her for who she really was. Even her closest allies began to pull away. By the time the divorce was finalized, she had only her personal belongings. Her lawyer quietly dismissed her complaint after recognizing there was no legal basis to maintain any of those bold requests. Everything crumbled under the weight of the documents I'd produced, and the trust I'd established with my mother was ironclad. As for Jake, who'd seemed unbreakable, he disappeared as soon as things started falling apart. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd been using her as much as she'd used me. From what I could tell, he'd been feeding her fantasies of independence and a new beginning, but the moment it became clear she wasn't leaving with anything, he was gone. Without Jake in her corner, her confidence plummeted. The calls and texts continued but became increasingly desperate. She wasn't accusing me anymore, she was begging. "Can we just talk? Please, I'll do anything to fix this." The voicemails expressed a different sentiment. "You don't have to forgive me, but can't we just work this out and move on? I'll give up everything if you'll just talk to me." I couldn't respond. It was too late to reverse the damage. Even her family started pulling away. Her brother reached out to me once, apologizing for some of the things he'd said before when he'd believed her version of the story. "I didn't know what she was doing to you," he said. "I'm sorry I believed her word." Moving forward. As for me, I got the house, my savings, and something I hadn't experienced for a long time: peace. My mom, as always, was my safe harbor. She arrived with buckets of paint and a list of suggestions to help me reclaim the space as mine. Now life feels like it's mine again. No more doubts, no more small interactions that feel like betrayal, just peace. She's a chapter of my story I no longer read, and the rest of the story depends entirely on me. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and activate the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.